You think you know Led Zeppelin? Think again. Today we're diving into 5 crazy facts that even diehard fans might not know. These are 5 facts about Led Zeppelin that sound completely made up, but are absolutely true. We're talking about a band that landed a major record deal without the label ever watching them perform, recorded their debut album for less than £2,000, sold somewhere between 200 and 300 million records worldwide, and somehow never scored a single #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100. Led Zeppelin didn't just break the rules of the music industry, they rewrote them entirely. Today we're going to look at 5 of the most unbelievable stories from their legendary career, all of them verified, all of them true. Let's get into it. Fact 1. The album that cost less than a used car. Fall of 1968, and 4 musicians walked into Olympic Studios in London to record an album. No record deal waited for them, and no label backing existed. What they carried with them was a vision, a tight-knit band, and a guitarist willing to pay for the whole thing out of his own pocket. Jimmy Page had just come off the dissolution of the Yardbirds, and he'd assembled what he believed would be the next great rock band. Robert Plant handled vocals, John Paul Jones covered bass and keyboards, and John Bonham sat behind the drums. The group called themselves the New Yardbirds at first, then changed the name to Led Zeppelin shortly after. And this is where it gets crazy, because the entire first Led Zeppelin album was recorded in just 36 hours of studio time. That's all it took to create one of the most influential rock albums ever made. 1,782 pounds covered the total cost, which translates to roughly £37,000 in today's money. That sounds like a lot until you consider that some modern albums cost millions to produce, and Michael Jackson's Invincible reportedly ran around $40 million. Page put it best when he explained that he wanted artistic control in a vice grip because he knew exactly what he wanted to do with the band. He financed and completely recorded the first album before approaching Atlantic, and the other advantage to having such a clear vision was that it kept recording costs to a minimum. 30 hours for the whole first album, and he knew that for certain because he paid the bill. That bill got split between Page and manager Peter Grant, and they recorded everything before they even had a label interested. The gamble was enormous, and it paid off beyond anything they could have imagined. 8 million copies sold worldwide from that album alone, and the initial investment of under £2,000 reportedly generated over £3.5 million in revenue. But here's the thing. How did a band with no deal and no backing convince a major label to take a chance on them? That brings us to our second fact. Stick around till the end for a fact that will blow your mind about one of rock's greatest legends. Fact 2. Signed without being seen. November 1968, and Atlantic Records did something almost unheard of in the music business by signing Led Zeppelin to what was, at the time, one of the biggest recording deals ever offered to a new band. $143,000 made up the advance, which equals over $1.25 million today. Here's the crazy part, because Atlantic Records executives had never seen Led Zeppelin perform, not once. They signed the band completely blind. The answer to how this happened involves one of the most unexpected figures in rock history, and that figure is Dusty Springfield. Springfield was recording her landmark album Dusty in Memphis at Atlantic Records during 1968, and she happened to know John Paul Jones, who had been her touring bass player. When she heard about this new band he'd joined, she went directly to Atlantic executives Jerry Wexler and Ahmet Ertegun and told them they needed to sign these guys. Peter Grant flew to New York carrying demo tapes of the album the band had already recorded. And based on those tapes and Dusty Springfield's recommendation alone, Atlantic signed the deal. Nobody at the label had seen the band perform live, and nobody had witnessed what would become one of the most electrifying stage shows in rock history. Court documents recently revealed the contract, which shows just how much faith Atlantic placed in this unknown band. Over $100,000 arrived as an initial payment upon signing, with additional payments following in 1969 and 1970. More important than the money was that the band retained significant artistic control, something almost unheard of for a new act. This is one of those moments in music history that makes you wonder what would have happened if Dusty Springfield had never made that recommendation, and whether Atlantic would have discovered them eventually, or some other label would have taken the chance. What we do know is that Atlantic's blind faith in 4 unknown British musicians became one of the greatest bets in music industry history. Fact 3. The biggest band with no #1 hits. Now here's a fact that genuinely confuses people when they first hear it, because Led Zeppelin, one of the best-selling musical acts of all time with an estimated 200 to 300 million records sold worldwide, never had a #1 single on the Billboard Hot 100. Not one. 111.5 million certified units sold in the United States alone. 7 #1 albums in America. 8 consecutive #1 albums in the UK. And by the traditional measure of a hit single, they technically had none. Their highest charting song was Whole Lotta Love in 1969, which peaked at #4, and their most famous song, Stairway to Heaven, never got released as a single in the United States. That's why it never appeared on the Billboard charts at all, despite being one of the most played songs in rock radio history throughout the 1970s. None of this happened by accident because it was completely deliberate. Led Zeppelin believed that their songs needed to be experienced within the context of a full album, and to them, pulling out a single track and selling it separately meant betraying the artistic vision. Singles never got released in the UK at all, and when Atlantic Records created a shortened version of Whole Lotta Love for American radio, Jimmy Page was furious. His words to the Wall Street Journal were direct, saying he played it once, hated it, and never listened to the short version again. Television appearances got avoided too, with the band preferring to maintain an air of mystique. If you wanted to hear Led Zeppelin, you had 2 options, either buy the album or see them live. Even their most commercially successful album, Led Zeppelin 4, with 37 million copies sold worldwide, peaked at only #2 on the Billboard 200, and what kept it from the top spot was Carole King's album Music. The irony runs deep here because by every meaningful measure, Led Zeppelin ranked among the most successful bands in history. Yet by the traditional yardstick of #1 hits, they sit in the same category as other legendary acts who never topped the singles chart, including The Who, Deep Purple, and Creedence Clearwater Revival, who somehow had 5 different songs stall at #2 without ever reaching #1. Led Zeppelin proved that you didn't need hit singles to become the biggest band in the world. You just needed to be undeniable. Fact 4. 20 million people wanted 18,000 tickets, September 25, 1980, and Led Zeppelin effectively ended. Drummer John Bonham was found dead at Jimmy Page's home after a day of heavy drinking, just 32 years old. Out of respect for their fallen bandmate, the remaining 3 members disbanded the group. A few brief reunions followed over the decades, including a shambolic performance at Live Aid in 1985 that the band themselves considered a disaster, an awkward set at Atlantic Records' 40th anniversary in 1988, and the occasional one-off appearance, but a full concert seemed impossible. That changed on December 10, 2007. The occasion was a tribute concert for Ahmet Ertegun, the Atlantic Records founder who had taken that chance on them back in 1968. And the surviving members of Led Zeppelin would perform their first full-length concert in nearly 30 years with Jason Bonham, John's son, playing drums. What happened next set a Guinness World Record that still stands today, because 20 million people applied for tickets, 20 million for a venue that held roughly 18 to 20,000 people. That works out to more than 1,000 requests for every available seat. The ticket application website crashed almost immediately, with reports of 80,000 requests coming in per minute at peak times. Jimmy Page reflected on the demand later, saying he knew it was going to sell out quickly, but the tidal wave of euphoria that preceded the gig and the anticipation went beyond what he could possibly have imagined. Original tickets carried a price of £125, but on resale sites like eBay, they went for up to £1,800, more than 14 times face value. £83,000 for a pair of tickets marked the highest known price paid, purchased at a BBC Radio 2 charity auction for children in need. Rock royalty filled the concert venue itself with Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, Jeff Beck, Brian May, David Gilmour, Dave Grohl, and even the Crown Prince of Denmark in attendance. And the performance delivered unlike their troubled appearances at Live Aid and the Atlantic Anniversary Show, with the band playing 16 songs over 2 hours to unanimous critical praise. The concert was released as a film called Celebration Day in 2012. That O2 Arena show remains the last time the three surviving members of Led Zeppelin performed together, and 20 million people wanted to be there while fewer than 20,000 got in. Those who did witnessed the end of an era. Fact 5. The Guitarist and the Occultist's Haunted Mansion. Our final fact takes us to the shores of Loch Ness in Scotland, to a house with one of the strangest histories in British real estate. Boleskine House was built in the late 18th century as a hunting lodge, but it became infamous in 1899 when Aleister Crowley purchased it, the British occultist who was once called the wickedest man in the world by the British press. Crowley bought the house specifically to perform a 6-month magical ritual from a text called the Book of Abramelin, and according to him, the ritual required a secluded location with specific architectural features, which Boleskine provided. The ritual was meant to help him contact what he called his guardian angel. Legend has it that Crowley had to leave before completing the ritual, allegedly leaving summoned demons gathered at the property. Belief in that claim aside, the house developed a reputation for tragedy, and a later owner named Major Edward Grant committed suicide with a shotgun in Crowley's former bedroom in 1965. The house went up for sale in 1970, and the buyer was Jimmy Page. Page collected Crowley memorabilia devotedly, had read extensively about Crowley's religion called Thelema, and even owned an occult bookshop in London called the Equinox Booksellers and Publishers on Kensington High Street. When Boleskine House became available, he had to have it. 22 years passed with Page owning the property, from 1970 to 1992. But here's the thing, he rarely actually stayed there. Instead, his friend Malcolm Dent lived in the house and maintained it. Dent described himself as a skeptic when he moved in, yet he reported numerous unexplained occurrences during his time at Boleskine. Doors slammed throughout the night and carpets and rugs rolled themselves up inexplicably. A female guest woke up screaming that she'd been attacked by some kind of devil, and Dent himself once heard what sounded like a wild animal snorting and clawing at his bedroom door, too scared to open it until morning when he found nothing there. Despite all this, Dent raised his family at Boleskine, and by the time he left, he acknowledged that there were things about that house he simply couldn't explain. Page once described how strange things had happened in that house that had nothing to do with Crowley, that the bad vibes were already there because a man was beheaded there, and sometimes you can hear his head rolling down. The house appeared in Led Zeppelin's 1976 concert film The Song Remains the Same, and Page's interest in the occult fueled speculation about the band's music, including persistent rumors about backward satanic messages in Stairway to Heaven, which the band consistently dismissed. Page sold Boleskine in 1992, and the house suffered major fires in 2015 and 2019 before the Boleskine House Foundation began restoring it with plans to open it for public tours. So there you have it, 5 facts about Led Zeppelin that sound too strange to be true, but are completely verified. A debut album recorded in 36 hours for under £2,000 that became one of the most influential rock records ever made. A record deal signed without the label ever seeing the band perform. Hundreds of millions of records sold without a single #1 hit. 20 million people fighting for 18,000 tickets to a reunion concert. And a guitarist who owned the haunted former home of history's most notorious occultist. Led Zeppelin didn't just make music, they created mythology. They operated by their own rules, defied industry conventions, and built a legacy that has only grown in the decades since John Bonham's death ended their original run. They proved that you didn't need to play the game to win it, you just needed to be so good that the game had to adjust to you. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments which Led Zeppelin facts surprised you the most. And if you have suggestions for other bands you'd like me to cover, drop those below as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.